Ever since I was a kid, I could see the bank balance floating above people's heads. After I took a summer job at an electronics factory, this ability helped me dodge plenty of workplace scams and shady coworkers. But everything changed on a Friday afternoon when Hailey Marin, the factory beauty, slammed her phone down in front of me. "I thought my online date was a rich heir with sports cars," she complained, rolling her eyes. "Turns out, he's just a broke guy tightening screws in the next workshop. He keeps begging to meet up, and it's driving me crazy. Go meet him and pretend you're me." I looked at where she pointed. A young man in a faded uniform was squatting by the gate, trying to fix a peeling scooter. Nearby workers were openly mocking him. Hailey wrinkled her nose. "Letting a guy like that carry my purse in public would be an embarrassment."
I didn't hear a word she said.
My full attention was on the numbers hovering above his head. Tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of millions. I nearly choked on my boba. It was a staggering 8-figure balance. And the numbers were still ticking upward in real time. I grabbed Hailey's arm.
"Quick.
"Tell me every detail you two talked about online." She froze. "Are you crazy? You really want to meet that broke loser?" I nodded, looking at the hidden billionaire outside.
Yep."
Hailey Marin let out a cold laugh, then texted me the secret code phrase and identity details for her online relationship. She twirled her fake designer bag and walked away. I slipped my phone into my pocket, threw on my old jacket, and walked straight toward the gate. "Lucas Reed." I stopped beside his beat-up scooter. The man looked up. He had sharp features, though a thick streak of engine oil across his forehead slightly masked his appearance. He sized me up. "Hailey Marin?" I smiled. "That's me." Lucas stood up, brushed the dirt off his hands, and pointed to the street across from the factory. "For our first meeting, let me treat you to a meal," he offered. "Don't mind if it's nothing fancy." He led me into a cheap diner and ordered 2 plates of basic pasta. They were $6 each, without a shred of meat. The plates had visible grease stains on the rims. If it had been Hailey, she probably would have flipped the table. I simply picked up my fork and dug into the pasta, which tasted strongly of cheap soy sauce. I looked up and flashed a smile. "It's good." As I ate, I kept my eyes on the digits floating above his head. Every time I looked up, I could see his massive balance. Even as I swallowed the last of the food, the number ticked upward by another few $100s. After we finished eating, his old scooter completely broke down. The front panel latch snapped, the battery cables dangled out, and the key refused to turn. "Sorry, the scooter is acting up," he said, raising an eyebrow, but there wasn't a trace of regret in his tone. Without a word, I pulled a black insulating hairpin out of my hair, bent down, and pried open the broken panel. Not missing a beat, I jumped the ignition by bridging the positive and negative copper wires and used the hairpin to secure the loose latch. "Try the key now," I said, dusting off my hands. His eyes narrowed slightly. He twisted the key, and the engine roared back to life. "It should be good enough to get you back to the dorm," I noted. He glanced down at my oil-stained fingers and chuckled. "You're a little different from what I imagined." Just then, a camera shutter clicked in the distance. Hailey was standing across the street, holding up her phone to take a photo of me with dirty hands as I stood next to Lucas and his busted scooter. Within minutes, the factory group chat exploded. Hailey had posted the photo to her social media with a mocking caption, "LOL. Trash belongs with a loser. Enjoy riding that piece of junk forever." The comments flooded in, with almost every worker joining in on the joke. I looked at my phone screen, simply closed the app, and headed straight back to the dorms. Just as I reached the building entrance, the roar of a high-end engine cut through the air. A brand new Mercedes pulled up in front of the dorm gates. The door swung open, and a sharply dressed man stepped out, holding a massive bouquet of red roses. When he handed the flowers to Hailey, the surrounding female workers gasped in excitement and flocked around her, showering her with compliments. Then they turned their mocking eyes toward me in the corner. "Allow me to introduce my boyfriend, Zach Langston," Hailey started, lifting his chin. "He's the nephew of Supervisor Langston from the main office, a wealthy heir who just returned from studying abroad." I quietly looked up at the celebrated heir. There was no massive fortune floating above his head. Instead, there was a glaring, blood-red sequence of digits, -$8 million. Worse yet, that negative number kept ticking downward. He was sinking deeper into debt by the second. A cold smirk played at my lips as realization sank in. Hailey had willingly thrown away a mountain of gold to chase a black hole. The next morning, the entrance to the workshop was buzzing. Zach had parked his rented Mercedes right out front, the trunk packed with premium cigars and other gifts. He handed them out to everyone in sight. "Wow, Mr. Langston is so generous. Hailey is so lucky to land a guy like that." The entire factory shifted overnight. Even the few coworkers who used to talk to me now avoided me like the plague. Hailey sauntered up, pinching a $100 bill between two fingers. Sorry, we ran out of gifts. But since you enjoyed that pasta so much yesterday, consider this a tip for a nice meal. After all, your boyfriend probably can't even afford a cheap value meal at a burger joint. I didn't even look at the money. I just walked right past her to clock in. Her eyes narrowed, and she ran back to cuddle up to Zach. A few minutes later, before I could hit the assembly line, the plant supervisor stepped into my path. Hailey isn't feeling well, so she's being moved to the air-conditioned quality inspection room, Patrick Langston said without even looking up from the cigarette dangling from his mouth. You're switching with her. Report to the C-Zone stamping and grinding workshop. The surrounding workers sneered at my situation. Zach came over, patting Patrick on the shoulder before giving me a smug look. Broke bones need to be ground down in tough places. My uncle handpicked this spot just for you. If you can't handle it, quit. I quietly grabbed my toolbox and walked over to C-Zone. The moment I pushed open the door, a wave of pungent dust and suffocating heat hit me. Ancient stamping machines roared. The exhaust fan was jammed on its track, screeching loudly. After setting down my toolbox, I put on a mask, grabbed a ladder, and climbed up to the rooftop exhaust unit. Prying off the casing, I found the issue. The pulley gear was clogged with metal shavings. Loosen the belt one notch and use a screwdriver to wedge the tensioner's blind spot. A deep voice called out from below. It was Lucas standing at the base of the ladder in an electrician's uniform. He held up a long-reach flathead and a 12mm box wrench, the exact tools I needed. Thanks. I took the tools and pried hard until the gear clicked back into place. Then I snapped the belt back on and flipped the power switch. The exhaust fan, dead for half a month, roared back to life. The dust cleared rapidly, and the temperature dropped. I hopped down from the ladder, taking the bottle of mineral water Lucas handed me. We stood side by side at the machine. He adjusted the base parameters while I oiled the molds. No words were necessary. Every time I reached out, he placed the exact tool I needed right into my hand. The workshop door swung open. Zach walked in with his arm around Hailey, flanked by a few security guards. His face darkened instantly when he saw the fan running smoothly and the two of us working in perfect sync. Aren't you two so capable? He snorted, letting go of Hailey and walking over to slam his hand onto the control panel. Shut it down. Who permitted you to mess with the equipment? Today, I'm going to... My eyes locked onto the debt counter above his head. The moment he approached the machinery, his balance jumped from -$8 million to -$8,050,000. A malicious glint flashed in his eyes. He discreetly unbuckled his wristwatch and tossed it onto the vibrating edge of the conveyor belt. The watch rolled along the vibrating conveyor belt and fell straight into the crushing gears. The dial was instantly shredded into scrap metal, triggering the machine's warning alarm. The belt ground to a halt, and the entire workshop went dead quiet. You're Patek Philippe, Hailey screamed, rushing forward in her high heels. She pointed at the mangled metal with a trembling finger and glared at me. Are you crazy? Do you have any idea how much that watch costs? Zach had it specially brought back from abroad. It's a limited edition worth $500,000. Workers flooded in from a hallway, surrounding the area. In a factory where the average monthly salary was only $3,000, a $500,000 debt was a life-shattering amount. Everyone looked at me as if I were already ruined. Zach kicked over a nearby trash can and roared. Are you blind? Weren't you watching the machine? I put my hand on the table, and you deliberately started the belt to destroy my watch. His voice was intentionally booming. This was a textbook extortion setup. Apologize right now and hand over $500,000. Zach stepped closer, his face twisted in rage. If you're short even a penny, you aren't leaving this factory on your feet today. Security. Four guards rushed in, cornering Lucas and me with electric batons raised. Patrick pushed through the crowd, casting a cold glance at the ruined watch. Improper operation and malicious damage to personal property, he said sanctimoniously. Admit your mistake, call your family, and cough up the money. Otherwise. He eyed the guard's batons. Not only are you fired, but you'll be looking at felony and prison time. Why waste your breath on a broke loser? Hailey chimed in, fanning the flames. She couldn't scrape up that kind of cash if she sold her organs on the black market. Sir, just call the police. Don't let her trashy presence ruin our workshop. The threats didn't faze me at all. I stood my ground, staring at the shifting numbers above Zach's head. He was shaking. It looked like rage on the surface, but I saw it for what it truly was: pure panic. He owed massive high-interest debts and desperately needed cash to fill the void. If that watch were genuinely worth $500,000, he never would have sacrificed it to industrial gears. The only explanation was that it was a fake, and he was running a scam. A calm voice cut through the chaos. She didn't start the belt, and you threw the watch in yourself. Lucas stepped out, shielding me from Zach. His eyes held no fear, only deep amusement. Did you think we're too poor to recognize a blatant extortion scam? He slid a hand into his pocket, his tone mocking. If you have the original box and papers for that watch, go ahead and call the police. Stop barking. Hit right where it hurt. Zach exploded. Who are you to butt in? He obviously didn't have any proof. The watch was a $2,000 knockoff. But he knew his uncle's authority was absolute here. Uncle Patrick. Zach pointed aggressively at Lucas. Since this broke idiot wants to play the hero, let him. Make them both pay. Running out of patience, Patrick stomped out his cigarette and waved a hand. Security stripped their badges and locked the gates. Nobody leaves until I see that $500,000. The guards advanced, their batons crackling. The crowd backed away, expecting a beatdown. Just as a guard reached for us, Lucas let out a soft sigh and slowly reached into the pocket of his faded electrician's uniform. Under everyone's stunned gazes, he pulled out a slightly worn, matte black bank card. It's just $500,000, right? Lucas tossed the card onto the payment terminal. Password is 6 zeros. Go ahead and swipe. The workshop fell dead silent for a split second before exploding into roaring laughter. Did the machine dust rot this kid's brain? A piece of plastic like that is lucky to have $50 in it. He's acting so well I almost believed him. Everyone mocked Lucas relentlessly. Hailey laughed the loudest, pointing a finger at the card. Do you think life is a movie and that's a billionaire's Amex Black card? You were choking down $6 pasta yesterday. Who are you trying to fool? Zach loosened his tie and shoved the security guards aside. He snatched the card and stepped up to the payment terminal, a machine normally reserved for meal cards and fines that broadcast transactions over a loudspeaker. He wanted everyone to hear the humiliating, insufficient balance alert. You love doing things the hard way, huh? He snorted, holding the card high.
Fin.
Turning to the crowd, he continued, quiet down, everyone. Let's listen to how much change this mechanic has to his name. The magnetic strip cleared. The room went deathly quiet as every worker and guard leaned in, waiting for the punchline. The terminal word, processing for 2 agonizing seconds. Then, a flat, automated voice echoed through the PA-link speaker. Payment successful. Amount deducted, $500,000. The internal printer word, spitting out a crisp receipt. The smug grins around us vanished instantly. The premium cigar dangling from Patrick's lips dropped onto the dirty floor. This is impossible. Hailey gasped, the color draining from her face. Zach's smirk froze, his mind going blank. You gotta be kidding me. How could that trashy card pull $500,000? He scrambled backward, shouting incoherently. The machine is broken. It's a glitch. It has to be. Nobody answered him. In the suffocating silence, Lucas stood perfectly still, his hands still casually resting in his pockets. The debt is cleared, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Now, it's my turn to settle scores with you. The silence in C-Zone was absolute, broken only by the low, mechanical hum of the newly repaired exhaust fan. Zach stood frozen, his eyes wide, staring at the small slip of thermal paper dangling from the payment terminal. On it, in crisp black ink, was the confirmation of a $500,000 wire transfer. Fake. It's a trick, Zach stammered, his face turning pale. He grabbed the terminal, violently shaking it as if trying to force the money back out.
He
Hacked the machine. Uncle Patrick, call the police. He hacked the network. Patrick Langston didn't answer right away. He stared at Lucas, then at the matte black card sitting innocently on the stainless steel table.
Patrick was a
veteran in the manufacturing sector. He knew that no local terminal could hack a national banking gateway in real time without an instant fraud trigger.
That
money was real. It had cleared. Above Zach's head, the blood-red numbers shifted violently. Minus 8,050,000, asterisk flickered, plunged, and settled at minus 8,550,000. The extra $500,000 was now a formal transaction logged into the factory's financial ledger. I stepped forward, bending down to pick up the crushed remains of the Patek Philippe watch from the conveyor belt. I held the mangled casing up to the fluorescent lights. If this watch was an authentic limited edition grand complication worth $500,000, the movement gear bridges would be hand-carved solid gold, I said, my voice echoing across the room. Why are these gears made of stamped yellow brass? And why is the plating peeling off the balance wheel? I turned the piece around so the surrounding workers could see the cheap, zinc alloy core visible under the sheared casing. This is a nickel-plated clone, I added, looking straight at Zach. Street value, $200. You just extorted $500,000 for a toy. Hailey's face went white. She looked from the cheap brass gears in my hand to Zach's trembling hands. Zach,
What is she talking about?
you said your dad bought that in Geneva. Zach didn't answer her. He lunged at me, reaching out to grab the debris.
Give.
Me that, you little rat. Before his fingers could touch my jacket, Lucas caught him by the wrist. Lucas didn't hit him. He simply twisted Zach's arm downward with a clean, practiced motion that forced the self-proclaimed heir onto his knees. Since the $500,000 has been paid to the factory's central account as full compensation for damaged goods, the salvage property belongs entirely to me, Lucas said calmly, dropping the broken watch into his jacket pocket. And more importantly, every single transaction over $100,000 processed through a commercial terminal automatically generates a high-value flag at the corporate headquarters. Lucas pulled out his battered phone, glanced at the clock, and added, "It's 2:15 p.m. The Executive Compliance Board in the capital city received the system alert 3 minutes ago." Patrick's eyes widened with terror. He dropped his cigarette. "What did you
Say?
A line mechanic doesn't have $500,000 on his meal card," Lucas said with a cold, sharp smile. "Which means corporate compliance will want to know why a factory supervisor's nephew was taking $500,000 in cash transfers inside C-Zone during work hours." "You," Patrick's voice cracked. "Who the hell are you?" Before Lucas could answer, the heavy double doors of the workshop were thrown open with a bang. 3 tall men in tailored dark gray suits stepped into the dusty, oil-scented room. Behind them were 6 tall men wearing high-end private security uniforms, moving with military precision. The man in the lead was in his late 50s, carrying a leather brief bag, his eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. Every high-ranking officer in the factory group knew that face. It was Arthur Vance, the chief legal officer and executive director of Reed Industrial Holdings, the parent company that owned this factory and 30 others across the country. Patrick's knees went soft. "Director Vance, what brings you to the sub-assembly plant?" Director Vance ignored Patrick entirely. He swept his eyes across the dusty workshop, past the silent workers, past the stunned guards, until his gaze landed on Lucas, who was still wearing his faded, oil-stained electrician jumpsuit. Director Vance immediately walked up to Lucas, stopped 3 paces away, and bowed deeply at a perfect 90-degree angle. "Mr. Reed," Vance said respectfully, "we received the transaction alert from your backup vault account. The audit team has arrived as requested." The entire C-Zone workshop gasped in unison. Hailey froze, her designer bag slipping from her fingers and crashing onto the dirty floor. She stared at Lucas, then looked at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Above Lucas's head, the floating numbers flickered, condensing from the vague millions into an exact, towering sum, $890,450,000. And the sequence was still steadily climbing. "Mr. Reed?" Patrick stammered, his hands shaking violently as he tried to button his jacket. "Director Vance, there's a mistake. This guy is just a contract electrician from the 3rd workshop. He fixes the wiring." Director Vance stood up straight, turning his cold, piercing gaze onto Patrick. "Lucas Reed is the majority shareholder and newly appointed chairman of Reed Industrial Group," Vance said coldly. "He took office 3 weeks ago. Instead of sitting in the executive boardroom, Mr. Reed chose to conduct a unannounced, grassroots operational inspection across 6 regional manufacturing hubs to investigate reports of systemic embezzlement and supply chain fraud." Vance turned back to Lucas, handing him a tablet. "Sir, the preliminary forensic accounting team has completed their shadow audit of this plant. We found severe irregularities." I looked at Patrick. Above his head, his bank balance was no longer hidden. The numbers hovering over his supervisor's helmet flickered wildly, $1,240,000. But unlike Zach's negative debt, Patrick's numbers had a flashing orange tag attached to them. "Illicit funds/freeze pending." "Let me guess," Lucas said, scrolling through the tablet with one thumb. "Kickbacks on raw material procurement, fake maintenance invoices, and extortion of line workers through fabricated fines." "Precisely," Vance replied. "Over the past 3 years, Supervisor Patrick." Langston has diverted approximately $4.2 million into offshore shell accounts, while his nephew, Zach Langston, used factory funds to secure high-interest personal loans from underground lenders. Zach's face turned gray. He looked up from the floor, his eyes full of panic. The numbers above Zach's had shifted again. Minus 8,550,000, asterisk, dropped down to minus 12 million. The moment his cover was blown, his creditors, watching from afar, had likely liquidated his collateral and added default penalties.
No, no.
Zach screamed, scrambling toward Patrick. Uncle, you said you had everything covered. You said this factory's books were clean. Shut up, you idiot. Patrick barked, slapping his nephew across the face. Patrick turned to Lucas, sweating profusely. Mr. Reed, Chairman, I was set up. My nephew borrowed money from loan sharks using my name without my knowledge.
I
Was just trying to protect the family. Protect the family by framing innocent workers and demanding $500,000 for a fake watch. Lucas interrupted softly. He stepped closer to Patrick, his gaze dropping to the supervisor's badge pinned to the older man's chest. Lucas reached out, unclipped the badge, and dropped it into the dirty metal filings on the floor. You're fired, Lucas said simply. And the legal team will file a formal complaint with the Commercial Crimes Bureau within the hour. Every penny you took will be recovered through asset seizure. Patrick slumped to the floor, his spirit completely broken. Hailey, standing nearby, was shaking like a leaf. She looked at Zach, who was now weeping hysterically on the floor, and then turned her gaze toward Lucas. The man she had mocked as a broke loser, the man she had dumped and pushed off onto me, was actually the absolute owner of the entire industrial empire. She took a step forward, forcing a pathetic, fluttering smile onto her face. Lucas, Hailey said, her voice dropping into a soft, coaxing tone.
She
Smoothed her skirt and walked toward him, ignoring the dirt on the ground.
I
knew it. I knew you weren't an ordinary guy. Yesterday was just a misunderstanding. I was just testing you. I wanted to see if you were humble. She reached out to grab Lucas's arm, her eyes wide with desperation. We talked for 3 months online. You said you liked my smile. We can start over, right? I'll break up with Zach right now. I'll throw his stuff away. Lucas didn't even look at her. He took half a step sideways, letting her hand miss completely. You didn't test me, Lucas said coldly. You sent someone else to meet me because you thought I was worthless. And honestly, it was the best decision you ever made. He turned his head and looked at me. His sharp features softened, and the coldness in his eyes melted into a quiet, warm smile. If you hadn't sent her, Lucas said, looking into my eyes, I wouldn't have found someone who could fix an ignition wire with a hairpin, eat $6 pasta without complaining, and spot a fake watch in 5 seconds. Hailey stood frozen in place, her face burning with humiliation as the surrounding workers began to murmur and laugh at her expense. As for you, Miss Marin, Director Vance added, pulling a document from his folder. You lied about your qualifications on your employment application, falsified your time cards, and accepted kickbacks from Supervisor Langston in exchange for transferring other workers to hazardous posts. You are terminated, effective immediately, and you will receive a legal summons for compliance violations. Hailey's fake designer bag fell out of her hand again. She looked around the room, but not a single coworker looked at her with sympathy. The very people she had looked down upon were now watching her ruin with cold indifference. The afternoon sped by in a blur of corporate swiftness. By 4 p.m., the factory gate was cordoned off by corporate security.
Blacktown.
Cars lined the driveway as forensic accountants from headquarters took over the administrative building. Patrick and Zach were escorted away by legal officers to await police questioning. I sat in the air-conditioned manager's office, which had been emptied and cleaned, sipping a cup of warm tea. Lucas sat across from me, having changed out of his greasy jumpsuit into a simple, tailored black shirt. Without the engine oil on his forehead, his jawline was sharp, his posture commanding yet relaxed. Above his head, the numbers were still moving. $892,100,000. You aren't surprised, Lucas said suddenly, setting his teacup down. He looked at me with genuine curiosity. When Vance bowed to me, everyone in that room looked like they had seen a ghost. But your expression didn't change at
All.
I paused, holding my teacup in midair. I couldn't exactly tell him that I had been staring at an 8-figure net worth hovering over his head since the moment I walked up to his broken scooter. I'm just good at noticing details, I said smoothly. A guy riding a broken scooter who wears dirty work clothes doesn't usually have hands without calluses on the palms. You have wrench calluses on your fingers, but none on your palms, meaning you don't do manual labor for a living. You were practicing. Lucas chuckled. A rich, genuine sound.
Sharp.
Very sharp. My grandfather built this company from a small tool shop. Before he passed away last month, he made me promise to inspect the frontline plants myself before taking the board seat. He said, the real truth of a company isn't in the financial reports, it's on the factory floor. And you found plenty of truth today, I replied. I found corruption, Lucas said, his eyes darkening slightly. And I found that Patrick Langston wasn't acting alone. I leaned in. What do you mean? Lucas pulled up a financial map on his tablet. Zach Langston's debt isn't just high-interest gambling debt. He owes $8 million to the Vane Financial Group, a shady capital firm controlled by Victor Vane. Victor has been trying to force a hostile takeover of Reed Industrial's regional supply chain for 2
years.
Patrick was leaking our internal material costs to Victor in exchange for wiping Zach's debt. I looked down at the tablet, and suddenly, my vision shimmered. Through the glass wall of the office, I looked out toward the factory parking
lot.
A sleek black SUV had just pulled up near the main gate. 2 men stepped out. One was a tall, heavily tattooed man in a leather jacket. The other was an older man in an expensive pinstripe suit, holding a silver cane. Above the head of the man with the cane, a massive number burned in dark, bloody, purple digits, $45 million, with a secondary sublabel floating beneath it. High risk/criminal enterprise. Beside him, the tattooed man carried a balance of $120,000, but his sublabel read, active warrants/enforcer. Lucas, I said softly, standing up from my chair. They're here. Lucas stood up beside me, following my gaze out the window. His eyes narrowed. Victor Vane. He didn't come to negotiate, I warned, watching the red and purple light radiating from the visitors.
Look at his entourage.
They aren't lawyers. Patrick and Zach had failed to secure the $500,000 extortion money, and now that corporate auditors were inside the building, Victor Vane's entire illegal leverage operation was in danger of being exposed. When a loan shark loses his leverage, he doesn't cut his losses. He burns the evidence. Suddenly, the fire alarms inside the administrative building began to blare.
Beep, beep, beep.
Smoke began to billow from the basement server room down the hall. They're destroying the local server drives, Lucas said, his voice dropping into a deadly register. Patrick gave them the security codes before he was taken away. Not just the drives, I said, pointing out the window. The tattooed enforcer was carrying a heavy metal canister toward the primary electrical substation near the C-Zone workshop. If that substation blew, the entire plant would catch fire, and the financial records stored in the local physical archives would burn to ashes. Lucas reached for his phone to call corporate security, but I grabbed his wrist. Security is stationed at the front gate, I said quickly. By the time they run to the substation, that guy will have tripped the high-voltage breaker with an accelerant. Follow me. We sprinted through the side maintenance corridor, avoiding the panicked workers, who were evacuating the main building due to the smoke alarms. Because I had spent the entire summer taking odd jobs and fixing equipment across the entire facility, I knew every shortcut in the plant. I led Lucas through the old underground utility pipe tunnel, cutting directly beneath the main courtyard. When we pushed open the heavy iron door of the substation yard, the rain had started to fall. The tattooed man, whose name badge on his jacket read Grizz, was pouring a thick, yellow chemical liquid over the primary transformer box. Victor Vane stood under a large black umbrella held by a bodyguard, leaning on his silver cane, watching impassively. Stop. Lucas's voice cut through the sound of the falling rain. Victor Vane turned slowly. His face was weathered, with a jagged scar running down his right cheek. He looked at Lucas, then at me, an amused smile touching his lips. Young Mr. Reed, Victor said softly, his voice raspy like sandpaper. You move
fast,
just like your grandfather. But you're a bit too late. This plant is old. Electrical fires happen all the time in places with poor maintenance. It's a tragic accident. An accident that conveniently erases $8 million in fraudulent supply contracts. Lucas said, stepping out into the rain. You used Zach Langston to bleed this factory dry, Victor. But the corporate server logs were already mirrored to the cloud 10 minutes ago. Burning this box changes nothing. Victor's smile faded slightly. He looked at Grizz. Finish it. Grizz pulled a heavy military-grade flare out of his pocket and struck the ignition cap. A bright red flame burst into life, sputtering against the rain. Above Grizz's head, his floating balance flickered wildly. 120,000, asterisk suddenly began to drop rapidly. 100,000. 80,000. 50,000. My mind raced. Why is his balance dropping right now? I scanned the transformer box, then looked at Grizz's feet. He was standing directly in a puddle of water that was laced with a yellow chemical. Accelerant, a compound high in copper salts and liquid electrolytes. He didn't know it, but the high-voltage ground wire behind the casing had already been loosened by Patrick's illegal modifications earlier that morning. If Grizz threw that flare into the box while standing in that conductive puddle, the high-voltage arc would travel straight back through the liquid path, frying him instantly and detonating the chemical reserves. His balance wasn't just his money, it was his net lifetime value, and it was plummeting because his life was seconds away from ending. Don't throw it, I screamed, stepping forward. Grizz sneered at me. Shut up, girl. The ground wire behind the main junction is open, I yelled, pointing at his
feet.
You poured a high-conductivity electrolyte solution right into a 10,000-volt leakage zone. The moment that flare hits the arc point, the current will ground through your boots. You aren't getting paid, you're going to be cooked alive. Grizz froze. He looked down at the pooling yellow liquid around his heavy work boots, then looked at the humming, vibrating transformer box 3 feet away. Victor Vane's eyes narrowed. She's lying. She's trying to stall you. Throw the flare. Look at the indicator lamp on the sub-panel. I shouted, taking another step forward. It's flashing yellow. That means an ungrounded phase leak. If you don't believe me, throw a metal coin into the puddle. Grizz hesitated. He was a ruthless thug, but he wasn't suicidal. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a quarter, and tossed it into the puddle near the transformer base. Spark.
BZZZ.
A blinding blue arc of electricity snapped out from the metal casing, striking the coin with a deafening crackle. The water violently boiled, sending a plume of acrid smoke into the air. Grizz gasped, stumbling backward out of the water, dropping the flare onto the dry concrete behind him. His face went as white as a sheet. Above his head, the terrifying plunge stopped, stabilizing back at $120,000. You? Grizz stared at me, terror in his eyes. He looked at Victor Vane, realization dawning on him. Boss, you knew the panel was leaking? You sent me in here to take the blast so there wouldn't be any witnesses left. Nonsense. Victor snapped, his composure finally breaking. She's tricking you. I saw the schematics Patrick brought to your office yesterday. Grizz roared, stepping away from Victor. You wanted the whole plant to burn with me inside. Before Victor could order his remaining bodyguard to take action, the heavy iron gates of the substation yard were smashed open. 4 marked police cruisers, flanked by Reed Industrial's high-level security force, flooded into the yard, sirens blaring, red and blue lights flashing. Against the rain-soaked pavement, armed officers poured out of the vehicles, weapons raised. Police. Nobody move. Hands where we can see them. Victor Vane stood motionless under his umbrella. He slowly raised his hands, his face twisting into a mask of pure venom as he stared at Lucas and me. Above Victor's head, his towering 45 million, balance suddenly turned a deep, flashing orange. The numbers began to violently tick downward in huge chunks. 35 million. 20 million. 5 million. With his criminal network exposed, his illegal assets seized, and corporate lawsuits incoming, the lone Shark King was completely wiped out. By the time the sun began to set, the rain had stopped, leaving the sky painted in brilliant shades of amber and purple. The factory was quiet. Victor Vane, Patrick, and Zach had been hauled away in separate police transport vans. The Lone Shark Syndicate's local assets were frozen, and the corporate audit team had taken full control of the plant's management. Outside the main administrative gate, a crowd of workers had gathered. Hailey was standing near the bus stop, carrying 2 trash bags packed with her personal belongings from the dorm. Her fake designer bag was scuffed, her high heels broken at the strap. When she saw Lucas and me walking out of the building together, she stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. Lucas. She choked out, her voice trembling. Please, just listen to me for 1 minute. I was fooled by Zach. He lied to me about everything. I didn't mean to treat you like that. I can change. I'll do anything. Lucas stopped, looking at her with a calm, neutral expression. Hailey, he said softly, when you saw a man fixing a broken scooter in the rain, you saw a loser who wasn't worth your time. When you saw a man in a rented Mercedes, you saw a prince. You never cared about who the person was, you only cared about the numbers you thought they had. I looked at Hailey. Above her head, her balance was a modest, flickering $1,200. But more than that, her social status and reputation in the industry were completely ruined. I don't hate you, Lucas added quietly, because to me you're just a stranger. Without waiting for her reply, Lucas turned and walked toward a sleek, matte black Maybach parked by the entrance. Director Vance opened the rear door for him, bowing respectfully. Lucas stopped at the car door, then turned back to look at me. He held out his hand. Are you coming? He asked, a gentle smile appearing on his face. Or do you have another summer job to get to? I looked down at my hands. They were still slightly stained with oil from fixing the exhaust fan and jumping the scooter ignition. Then I looked up at the numbers floating above his head. The digits were settled, glowing with a soft, warm golden hue. $892,100,000. But for the first time since I was a kid, I realized I wasn't looking at the numbers anymore. I was looking at the person beneath them. I think my summer job just got an upgrade, I said with a smile, stepping forward and taking his hand. 3 months later, the high-rise headquarters of Reed Industrial Group overlooked the sparkling skyline of the capital city. In the top-floor executive office, the morning sun poured through floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Reports were stacked neatly on the mahogany desk, detailing the complete overhaul of the company's regional plants. Embezzlement was down to zero, worker safety standards had doubled, and productivity was at an all-time high. I sat in a comfortable leather chair, wearing a tailored navy suit, looking over the quarterly risk assessment report. My title had changed, Special Operational Auditor to the chairman. A knock sounded on the door, and Lucas walked in, carrying 2 paper cups of
Coffee.
He set one down on my desk, leaning against the edge of the table. You're working late again, he noted, taking a sip from his cup. The board of directors just passed the new regional wage increase you proposed. The union reps are calling it the best contract in 20 years. It was simple math. I smiled, looking up from the documents. Pay people fairly, and they don't look for ways to steal. Simple math, Lucas repeated with a chuckle. Is that what you call your little secret? I froze slightly, setting my coffee cup down. What's secret? Lucas leaned in closer, his dark eyes sparkling with intelligence and subtle humor. For the past 3 months, Lucas said softly, you've made 64 high-level personnel decisions. You promoted 12 junior engineers who were stuck in dead-end posts, and you flagged 7 senior executives for financial fraud before our forensic accountants even opened their books. Every single prediction you made was 100% accurate. He looked at me, his smile deepening. It's almost like you can see right through people's pockets. I felt my heart skip a beat, but then I laughed softly. Maybe I just have an eye for real value, I said, looking up into his eyes. Above Lucas's head, the towering 9-figure balance was still there, floating softly in the morning light, $910,250,000. Then, I looked down at my own reflection in the dark glass of the desk. Floating right above my own head was a brand new set of crisp, brilliant golden digits. $10 million. 00, my performance equity stake in the restructured conglomerate, along with a secondary tag that read, Partner/True Net Worth. I smiled, closing the file folder on my desk. In a world driven by flashy appearances, fake luxury, and endless greed, numbers could lie, people could fake their status, and gold could turn out to be cheap.
Brass.
But true value, character, loyalty, and sharp intelligence was something no scam could ever fake and no amount of money could ever buy. Lucas held out his hand to me. Ready for lunch? I know a great little place across town. Let me guess, I said, taking his hand as I stood up. $6 pasta? Lucas laughed, pulling me close. Only the best.